Dear students, today is the second week of battery theory. Last week, we introduced the equations between Maxwell and his. There are some parts of the so-called pushdown. There is still a part of the Maxwell equation, and it has not been explained, so we will continue to discuss the so-called pushdown of Maxwell equation. We mentioned this since Ferretti proposed the field line. After the concept of field, then he has never been able to turn it into more appropriate math language until this Maxwell. Then he thinks Ferretti's theory is interesting, and it should be reasonable. So what is needed? Just put it into concept. Convert to mathematical equations. So because at that time, this study of fluid mechanics, actually, this is quite complete. So he found out this Ferretti mentioned, this field limit, this concept. Actually he can take it, analogizes the so-called flow line in the fluid. If this streamlined, this means, for example, your wind is moving. Then you sprinkle a lot of big colors for this example. These examples of large colors are in this. This changes with the flow. This stable streamline will be formed. That's the concept of streamline. When we were actually discussing fluid mechanics, I've seen a lot of them, too. Okay, so why? If we put this field line, if you think it is this streamline, then we can imagine that there is a strange, or that stroke is some similar material distribution molecule. Or this particle with Yang Wu's example. That's the example to be seen here. This imagination is very flowing here. Then think of it as fluid. If it's the same as fluid, then we can use this concept of fluid mechanics. Then we introduce these two very important physical concepts. The first physical concept is the so-called flux. Flex, the concept of flex is to say, suppose we consider a district surface, this district surface. Then, if the false angle between him and the streamline is this C, what we can see is flowing through this unconsidered section S. Its unit of time. This quality of the example past. It can be regarded as its fixed secret. Become this one's own remark. So what about this thing? In this section, no matter which angle it is light, as long as we ask for this, its normal component, the component of this flow field, then we can calculate the quality that passes per unit time. We call this the flux of mass. So put this concept. If this surface S is turned into an arbitrary area S, through this S, it can be written as yes. Its flux density is deduced into its normal vector. Then for the entire area, this is called flux. The quantity in it is called flux density. The equation of area division of flux in this way. We can make it a table. It's in this SY plane. Projection of Y-shaped plane and ZX-shaped plane. Then calculate separately its integral on the Y-shaped plane. There are also integrals on the ZX plane. There are also integrals on the XY plane. Okay, of course we can tell. On the YZ plane, X may be a fixed value. Then when the ZX plane is above, Y is a fixed value. Then when the XY plane is a fixed value. That's not written it very clearly here. Okay, then this is the first one. We can use this concept of flux of fluid. come on this carbon head. The impact of this field line of Ferretti. So we can apply it to the theory of electroblood. Then we can imagine it in the electroblood. According to the concept of this and that field line of Ferretti. This electricity box of this government. It will generate this power line outward. Let's put this power line. Its one is wide. Think of it as a flux density. Therefore, we can do any area machine stalk. The machine stalks in this area. If it is outside this electric generator, then its power line. It will be compared to entering this area and exiting this area. So this basic result is 0. But the opposite. If this area, it can contain an electric power. So what this electric agent has? What about the sum of this power? It should be this flux density. The basic result. Okay, so in this place. Maxwell. It's the Faraday. The concept of field lines. Combined with this power. That is to infer the secret of this flux. It will be the same as the power box contained in this area. Okay, so we can calculate this area of the electric flux secret. Get its total throughput. And this total flux. This Maxwell confirms. It's its electric box. That's a point like this. We call it a high teacher's rate. Because this master once had a similar score. Have done a considerable study. Good. This is after we introduced the secret of flux. The first equation obtained. This equation can also be seen as the first one in the equation. This equation of stock. But in such an equation, what we see is, this is a wide range of Gerber. A nature of this. But if we want to get a fair formulas for wide room use, then we have to learn from Neo-Erdingli. We need to find a way to get the equation of the only part of this part. So how do you get a local unique equation? That's let's face S. The smaller the scope, the better. Let it approach 100. Then when it approaches 10, what kind of equation can we get? Then we can get a breeze equation that manages the density of electricity flux. So let's take a look first. If we consider this surface, it is a rectangular area. And the area of this rectangular, we can make it volume. Delta x, delta y and delta z go in a mile. Then in the process in this area, let's consider entering with this volume inside. What is this flux? Okay, then let's assume the flux secret here. It's this V. That V is in the x direction. Direction y. What about the flux secret in the z direction? It is J1, J2, with J3. Then for this x direction, to put it in the YZ screen of the method phase, enter this area. Leave this screen. Their differences. The difference caused can be written as yes. When x adds reference data x. This flux secret. Reduce. This flux secret when reducing the reference data x. Then we can write it as such a form. We're in a data x. That's very obvious. If data x is proactive, then this part of SISI. It becomes this flux density stage. This component of its bias to x. Then I follow the same. If this theory is inferred, then it's for the x encircle normal vector inside the YZ. this difference in their flux. It's data J1 data X. Then what? This? The direction of Y is this data J2 is on service data Y. If you set the direction, it is data J3 to serve data Z. So when our volume area is hard, we can transform into this part of pash of J1 pash of X. This part is pash of J2 pash of Y. This part is pash of J3 pash of Z. So what we got? The concept of only fractions. That's it. The micropartner of X. The articles of step to the outside world. The scope of tax on oneself. That thing like this. The physical meaning it represents. It's in this tiny volume. By the density of this flux. The decided. This is almost out of the way. Go out. This total of this flux. So the X direction test represents the flux that goes out. If you check this here, you will be the amount of going out here. If you check this here, you will be the amount of going out here. So what it represents is under this flux factory. Leave this as the sum of the volume of its flux. So we can think of it as this winner is a black hole. The winner is a white hole. We can see the relationship based on this. If we look at this diagram of the power plant line, it's understandable. If it's any one. For example, this place. This position with the label 1. In this place. Its power plant is in this direction. We can guess the flux of the power plant. Probably in this direction. Then here we do one justice. Infinite small area. After wrapping it up. When the momentum is coming. What we can imagine is the line of entry. Will definitely come out. So it does not produce diverging flux. So in this place. We can know. Its divergent is equal to 0. But the opposite. If you consider that it's near a dot core. Then when I take this only. This change. Speaking of being very young. It still always contains. This point core of it. Certificate or attach Q. Then we can tell. This is here. It has the power flux generation. Or enter. Then this is what is called. This flux. Then this part is the nature of flux. Then what about next? We can see the same in other places. So we can understand. This general power line. After the surveillance starts. Then if. Our power line. Inside a certain point. Its direct a message. If it is equal to 0. It means there is no electricity connection in this place. But. If this direct a message. If you don't get it, it means there are some electrical cores here. Then it can be created by going out of this network. Or entered this build line. Okay, then this is the first concept related to flux. In addition, this theory we just talked about. He can also use this theory of slaughtering documents. Let's deduce it. Okay, so what we can think of is calculation of flux above 12 Fs. In the previous discussion, if we put its area forward, it is equivalent to WGSD. This WGSD. If we are considering a continuous distribution of this electric body, it's in this location. XYZ this place. WGSD it produces. It must be equal to computer density in that place. Okay, so this market value. It's in the Hall's causal equation. The first pure and bright equation. Divergist is equal to its computer density. Okay, so next. Let's look at this power plant again. We can use this kind of electricity to consider it. So what about this magnetic field? This Farah has been proposed. This concept of magnetic flux. Therefore, the so-called magnetic flux. Of course, it should be a magnetic flux density for the area you want to consider. Its complete area. If this area is a closed area. Just like the electricity flux density we just saw. This is the same area as the points of this closed area. According to what we just discussed, you can know that this word weighs density. Calculation of this integral flux. Word weighing calculation. That should be equivalent to the source of the word line it encompasses, or the generation of word example lines, or entry of word example lines. So if there is, this means to tell the truth. Then our word weighs. It should be the density of his job. It's similar to what I just discussed. It's the same density as this electrical connection. But in this Ferretti's experiment, no matter how small he cut the magnet, there is no way to find it. This single-stage magnetic field exists alone. That means only the deadline. There is no magnetic limit to come back. That kind of electric shock-like thing. Then such a single-level Dharma emperor believes that it does not exist. So our second equation about this flux. That is, the secret of the flux is equal to the result of the sum of the order he encloses. But because I can't find this single-level existence, so we are in any stone factory in our world. Integration of this closed surface of Shitong-Bru density. The result of this Shitong-Ju must be equal to 0. If it is a closed surface. So we can tell. This is a standing line like this. Call Farate to use this small wire. The observed line of this stone factory. We can find that there is actually no point. Only this strength line goes out. No strength line progress. Or there is only the strength line to progress. Go out without strength. Such a situation. In the strength line we observe. It won't happen. So what about that? Is this the case? All equations are the second ones. This equation. Same equation. Therefore, these two equations introduce the concept of flux introduced from the concept of motion of fluid examples in the flow description of fluids. The equation we get two fluxes is the secret of electricity flux between percent is equal to the secret of the electric river at the location. And the fraction of the magnetic flux in space should be equal to 0. Because there is no such magnetic single squeeze. Okay, then the horse is from this Faraday line concept. Then use the fluid to cover the wire and compare it to it later. The key to the second analogy is the so-called community selection. Let's wait and explain this or the concept of curvature. Then the concept of this curvature is from this court. What about this equation of real sound electricity? That's the beginning. Okay, according to this law of this court. Then if we have a closed circuit. Inside the closed circuit. If we can have a way. Let this closed circuit. The determined area. The stone flux generated by this area. Changes to time. It will be equal to. After a duplicate number on the layer. It's equivalent to being on this circuit. Its power plant. Then go around this closed area line. Good job. Then this will produce an electric type similar to voltage. Make the electron flow inside this return to generate an electric current. Then the concept proposed by Ferretti. That is to say the size of this electric type. It should be equal to. This is the flux that he decides through the area through. changes to time. So to show the function of this computer returning to the power plant, this electric type. So we need to calculate the yang-zi of this power plant. This closed area. Then a week. Then see how much it does. Then according to this theoretical function of mechanics, it's just a force. Then this works on a point. Then what's going on with him? Then the internal unit. Then add it to the points. That is the work done by a certain area line. Therefore we need to explain this so-called pulling body stock. In the flux discussion just now, we used the integral of the area surface. So now we want to introduce the work done by the power plant around this wind batch area line. We want to introduce the work done by this pulling body fruit. This line. This integral of the curve. That curve. We can use a single parameter formula. The table combs its position vector in X as the mark. Y as the marker and marker with yourself. Then the parameter on this snail salt wire. It's this CGM. What about this CGM? We can watch comb. It's in this S direction. Outer and Z directions. It's XYZ relative to this new phone. Then we can get the corresponding spiral line suddenly. Then in this one. What's the limit above this? Any point. We can all decide this tangent vector. Tangent vector. That's at any point this X. This dimension. There is also a foreign dimension. Z direction dimension. Deal with. The total length of this core is the following number. ds square plus dy square plus dz square. If we bring this restaurant into the restaurant, it can be expressed as the square of the X pair of horse suction. Plus the square of the Y pair of horse suction. Plus the square of the Z pair of horse suction. Then the square of the Z pair of horse suction. Then the only part of the restaurant, the only part of the restaurant, the only part of the restaurant, the only part of the horse suction. The only part of the restaurant, the only part of the horse suction. The only part of the restaurant, the only part of the horse suction. The only part of the restaurant, the only part of the horse suction. The function of the hiding curve can be expressed as such a line integral. Make a closed line integral for this zone. The result of this line integral, the law of creation, is equal to its negative. This direct throughput is the time segment. So we can define the density of the direct throughput. After we let the density break its normal direction at this time. For this area S determined by the phone coin limit C. Then the integral of a region is constructed. Then note that this area is an open area. It's not a phone coin area. Okay, so we can write something like this. It is to expand the current division and the area division into a complete. This result of the temporary marking. So what is the result of this? We can use Green's theory. Green's theory. We explained it last time, so I won't continue to explain it here. So from this Blinzer, we can promote the so-called Stokes spirit. Then this Stokes spirit is what I said earlier. What does this Marsa mean when it comes to building a bridge? This mathematics award in this modern era. Then he got second place. There was a question in that time. This is what we are talking about now, Stokes' spirit. Then we can write it to this Stokes' spirit as saying, it's a power plant or a profit. Then around this closed curve. Functions made. It is equivalent to the flux shift of this thing. Then this lesson. This basic result after the music class. Okay, so what about such a result? When I play this closed curve. We'll put it in size. At this time. It determines the area of this lintel. It's also Chijinli. Okay, if you think separately. This I just got. This calculation of Kerr. The calculation of this Kerr is. That's it. This Porzio Fz. Pauseo Y. Cut Porzio Phi Porzio Z. Then Porzio Fx. Pauseo Z. Cut out Porzio Fz. Pauseo X. There are also Fy, Fhux and Fuff's reduction Fhuy. What about such a calculation? We say it is a coarse calculation. What is the definition of this lesson? We mentioned earlier that Havicide is. It first uses a symbol like this. Let's explain this lesson. Okay, so this lesson. What it represents. Just be one of us. This basic score of this consideration. When approaching 0. When the area covered is approaching 0. Then it's corresponding. This is just like this, but it just happened to be just like this, but it just happened to be like this. And what about the profits of learning this time? We mentioned earlier. You can think of it as a special one. This del operator. This operator is a special partial calculation. Calculate the server. So what about that? I can think of this guest. Written as a cross. This form of del cross f. This will make it easier for us to remember. It's easier to calculate. Therefore, in this lesson we can get the calculation like this. What is the physical meaning of this? The word line it raised in court. I found that if an electric current passes through the sequence like this, the kindness field it produces is like this, right? This is discovered by arrangement. So, what we can see is, if we go somewhere to calculate his class, if it's in a place like this, if he has a calculating class, it will be equal to U. Why? Because he is just calculating. It's just a few points between this section and this section. The result of this is in this area. Because this range is very small. Okay, but if your skin is like this. Okay, that's a very small place like this. But it may contain something. Don't know this. Okay, then at this time. Your assumption says you're giving. Speaking of getting smaller and smaller. If you always maintain this shape of the circulation. If so. This is the thread that is made by this circulation. It's definitely not true. Why? Because of his power. With his. The direction of the region. His tangent square quantity is the same direction. So it must be greater than the truth. So after you come back from this circle, his result must be wrong. Good. So I can think of it. This. As long as it is the calculation of this class. If he doesn't. That means saying. Even if his small circulation is getting smaller and smaller. But he always maintains a closed curve. Therefore, at this time, F and his criminal law are in this curve. This is always a matter of mind. So the result of this points. It's definitely not true. So even if we say that this is very small, he won't make sense. So the physical meaning of this class is the representation. This is going to be the trend line. When it comes to how small, it always forms a closed circle. So, let's see it in this remarks. What about the observed phenomenon? It is to form a declaration. Then what about the announcement? We can say it is a vertex. It's just an announcement point. Good. So we know that. And there was an early book that he mentioned. He once made an orderly physical explanation. He said that this is a flow field with a mistake in the foot. Then any of the above points are wrong. All of this repeated exercise is in this original week. What about this original weekly movement? Assume that this angle is our trip. Suppose that the Kashu he roams like this are all European and American ports. Because these streamlines keep making money, right? So the example of that fluid has been making money there. The speed of character selection. Angle velocity is European and American ports. He can prove this angular velocity. If this V is engraved. What about his size and direction? It will be a representative. Such an angular velocity direction comes out. Therefore, we can explain further. Tell me about this class such a calculation. What it represents. That is to say, once this department is in charge. It means there is a pride point in it. So this is where Xianlu was born. That's where this department leads. So we can see. This means the announcement point of this power plant. It comes from the flux that is enclosed in him. There will be a magnetic flux in the middle. This change of time in secret. Then, if you are a power plant, build a very small lapu when he makes money. Then he can maintain a shape like this announced. Therefore, for this Ansh law. In Ansh's law, Mazer's explanation. He said the hypothetical data equation. That is to say, since we have observed a stone field caused by a single wire. It's the shape of a colleague. Then if it's two wires, the strength line they form is also in this shape. If the two wires flow oppositely, then the strength line they generate is like this. So in these situations, we can all see this existence of many announcement points. So, this Maser said, this place where the announcement point exists, it should be the density of the current flux. It should be the density of the current flux. Good. So, I got the fourth one. This horse may be. The second phaser type horse super may be. In this horse may be inside. His physical meaning is strength line. He will build a. This wind is this strength line. Then the strength of this from P. The place where the thrust point occurs is where the current occurs. Therefore, the position of the current is where the strength line is formed. That is to say, it can be imagined that this original stream is generated by the selection and transfer limit of our RTX. Okay, this is about these equations of Mars-Sol, which is a rough concept. Okay, that's in our discussion in the first four. I mentioned the concept of Mars-Sol who borrowed the incompressible fluid. Then the four methods mentioned earlier are two stock equations. Then the two phasors are. Some classmates were very smart and he immediately asked, Where did the concept of incompressible fluid be used? Incompressible fluid concept. We can imagine this. What we think in fluid mechanics is, we need to observe the movement of this fluid. There are two ways. One way is to fix it at a certain position in the middle of the flow field. Then look at this example of the fluid nearby. Changes go in and out. The other situation is the second. This equation in fluid mechanics is written. It is not to discuss it at a fixed position in the space. Instead, suppose you are following a fluid force. It will form a dance composed of many streamlined lines. Just count the streamlines. Then we will discuss the changes in this number streamline. Okay, in our problem, we use this fixed position to observe the fluid changes. This concept is easier to use in battery science, so if we consider a certain point x, y, z. Then the tiny microfinite volume near it. Data x, data y, data word inside. Then what we can talk about is all the fluids. They will all come in. Then go out and go out, right? That incompressible fluid. Meaning, this comes in this. Or go out. Its volume will not change. So it is to directly calculate the quality of it entering. With the high speed of fluid, it becomes its flux. So in this place, we consider the flux of this core. This nuclear flux. The secret note of the current flowing out of this area. The flux of the current injection. What is that? It is the total amount of the nucleus in the area it flows out of. Right. Then the total amount of nuclear power in the outflow area. If we are considering incompressible fluids. So how much fluid comes in? How much fluid will be out of the area? Right. So its psi lung book must be equal to the inside. Because it doesn't. This is from this area. There is no traffic flowing in and out. But there is an exception to the flag line. That is, if there is this blue circle of the flow rate. It's the personality of sweeping the lock. In other words, divergence is not something to be called. If divergence is not. So what should be here? Good. What about here? This part wrapped in this street. It represents diverging from here. This type of electric combination. That's normal, don't you want to say fluid words? It should be in it. Because I've been out as much as I've been. But if it's not, that must mean there is a river of electricity generated or annihilated rivers. Therefore, the flow of the electric river that goes out here, it should be equal to this. The electric river generated in every unit of time. These two should be equal. Because this is the flowing river of electricity. Is it time? So our place. The Q in it also needs to be counted on time. Okay, so here means you're in this tiny volume. In unit time. The amount of electric box left in the book. Equal to the density of the electric box in this. This rate of change over time. So if there is a source of the electric box in the foot, then the result of this integral. This item should be added. Okay, so we also use this one. Surfaced indigo. Divergent siren can be written as divergent G and for the entire volume. This integral And then we are on this volume, which is a positive result. Then we can write this equation as divergent G plus Hishiro and kick the ball and wait for it. Well, this fact is what is called the electric and hand horizontal law. Electrical and hand horizontal law. Okay, then the origin of this law. It is the fluid geology we use. The concept of incompressible fluids. Make this our electricity and this flow is power and density. Changes over time. The result of the addition of these two will be waiting for the. It is its total changing power. That is to say something bleeding. It is the amount of the electric box inside. Generation of power box quantity. And the total amount that flows out. The total box of these two things. It means you can maintain it. This balance. Maintain a certain state. So here. This electric box, Shunhang electric power, has come out. After the electric box flashlight came out. Ma so soon saw the law of Shuheng of the Jianhe River. The only situation of the Ampere law that it just introduced. There are some contradictions. Then this contradiction exists. We can see this. Okay, according to this Ampere's law. That's the strength line. This fundamental part of the loop is equal to the current secret it encloses. Then when you reach NDA, it means that the total amount of the cause it will be optimized for each unit time is right. Okay, then at the same time, we can use the four words as mentioned above. Its dimension form. Its dimension division form is curl H is equal to this connection. Then we will talk about something like this later. That is, this calculation for any cross. Curda calculation. What if it replaces vergence? Must be equal to. Why? Because we just saw this curda. Generally speaking, it is equal to. Only where is it not to be? Only where it is at the news point. It's not. But no matter if you are a message point or other place. You can't get from these closed curves. Or announce it inside. An example of running out of fluid. Impossible. So the calculation of any class. If he announces the inspection. It must be true. Because the announcement line is inside. Can't find a streamline. This source of the line of history. So the inspection is announced. Therefore, if we look at this arrangement law. For dimension type. If we take representatives on both sides of it. Then the one on the left becomes true. And the right side becomes a sign of inspection. However, according to the law of electric combination and hand balance. This means that the inspection order should be equal to. It contains the urinary machine. The rate of change of this electrical density to time. Become a rich man. If this thing is not powerful. Then you show it's spiritual. Then this becomes a contradictory equation. Okay, that traditional book. It's probably explained by which capacitor. When the capacitor is explained. It means that your closed circuit is. What about the results of this current component? Must be equal to the area it produces. Then the total current of the area he circumvents. So if a current flows like this. Then yours comes from this loop. You can decide on various types of this area. For example, this area of number 2. Area of number 3. Area 4, etc. Then if you use capacitors. According to this theory here. Between capacitors. There is no current flow. So, if we change this area to such an area. Then such a skin is equivalent to inside. But, we know that such a loop skin is not correct. Because like here, it's not right. Only when your area is taken like this. Instead, it becomes true. So this means that in the middle of this capacitor. There is the part where the current flows through. Something must be there. To maintain this principle of Shikawa Shinawatt. Because basically, the airline of the TV should be a more basic concept. So this place must be our equation. Needs some modifications. The result of this modification can be said. This equation is consistent with this electric power of Kawashuha. So what I think of at once. It's because he's pushed it down before. 1% is equal to its electric shell density. Right. So if we want this loop machine of H, this must be a horizontal rule of electric shell. A 4-character word related to a 4-character. Then take this cur. It's about this thing. When I took this thing. Because you can see this if you take this. When divergens. That's the place on the right. There was only the flux secret of this current. Now, I added this power flux secret. Rate of change to time. After adding it. When you're on the whole fact. When taking divergens. Here it becomes. Divergens is aware of repair. Afraid of repairing T divergens D. And divergens D. It's the density of the electric river. Therefore, this is in line with the principle of Dainkawa Sho Hong. Therefore, Maso thinks. This ampere rate. It's actually an incomplete rate. After that, one electric flux density must be added. Explain the dimensions of time. This H. The power line of this CURN source. Okay, then after adding this item to Fora. Then this matter becomes very interesting. Why? Because of this previous discussion. Whether it is Gaussian law, or Ampere's law, or Faraday's law of falling. It's probably between electricity and death. Didn't think about it together. But now our power flux density. The difference between death. I'll wait a moment and explain it immediately. The secret of electricity flux is to become a political pen with computers. So in this place. Our marketing courses. This unique equation. The only difference between the computer and the time. Generate related links. Add to Faraday. This equation of root energy communication. So these two equations. Combine the computer and the market. Then what if we combine it together? This they produced. This power plant market. The effect of crying with each other. That kind of dead. This mom said. From this equation, continue to push down. He then poured out the concept of electromagnetic field plane slope. Then we will continue to explain this later. At the same time, he discovered this plane slope of the electromagnetic field. His propagation speed is exactly the speed of light. Good, so many books. So, he said that the number of light he calculated is the speed at which his plane slope travels is the number of light. So he believed that just is a kind of battery wave. Okay, this statement seems to be okay, but not enough for Ju Yuan. Because maybe there is something else. His propagation speed is exactly the number of light, right? Then how can you judge that light is a kind of battery wave? Okay, that's actually before the scolding. Ferretti and his predecessors have done a lot of research on light. Ferretti had done some experiments. Proved that if light passes through the body or passes through some polarization. The choices that came were to observe the polarization of his light. Then we knew that it was the power plant. In fact, previous generations have done research on the intensity of light. So there is something that is exacerbated inside. Therefore, we can use the experimental results of the previous generations about the effects of light and matter. Add the number of lights it now gets. The concept of the speed of plane wave propagation. So it infers that light waves are a kind of television force. This is more reasonable. Certainly. As for why light is really a TV force consciousness. Of course, there must be a belt. Later generations are taking further research. But now we can probably Speaking of this place, I learned. This meso is based on the maiden. Talking about post-home. In this anhuidilu. The secret of its current flux. Add the dimension of power flux density to time. So this thing. Because its function is equivalent to ordinary current. So it gives it a name in particular. Unshifted current. Despair some car. About this. We had a special research last year. Mars Jan's researcher of the history of science experiments. Then they mentioned. This is actually. Marso would call this. Discriminate common. There is a reason. Because in Marso's era. They haven't jumped out yet. This concept of attitude and so on. So what? They will be suitable for saying. Inside the space. There are some things that always exist. That's because. Here. There will be some. Maybe there is something we look like. A bit like displacement. This detail. I can't explain. Because in this original paper of Maxwell. It has a secondary explanation. Of course the picture is not easy to understand. If we need the key to understand the previous thoughts. Not quite understandable. So we can't explain. This origin is called disfired Charon. Good. So next. We still have one problem that has not been resolved yet. In other words, the four equations in Maxwell are concepts. We can see in the discussion of electricity flux. What we use is the electric flux secret B. Then in this magnetic field. We have the magnetic flux secret B, right? But the actual effect of the example is the electric field. There is also a magnetic field. Definition of electric and magnetic fields. Not from the electrical flux secret. Or the size is its density. The definition of a power plant is per unit. The small electric core is in the power plant. The force that is subjected to. This is called a power plant. Then the strength of the ruler factory is also a similar concept. That is, if we have a small late nucleus during movement, then the force it is subject to each unit of the delayed core. It's this chi profit, right? So we actually have four quantities now. That one is the secret of electricity flux. One is the secret of stone flux. One is the power plant strength. One is the strength of the stone factory. Then these four times. It should be more relevant than this. Then here's the middle. If we consider. There is nothing in this emptying. We're called free space. That's in free space. We can make an assumption. That is to say we assume. This power flux density is verified by the strength of the power plant. If it becomes a proof ratio, there is a proportional constant. What about this proportional constant? I'll call it apple 0. What about this apple 0? We call it another definition. TEMI-TV body in free space. What about the word TEMI-TV? Actually it's very similar. For example, inside the capacitor. The electricity and quantity that can be allowed. Right, we can call it the next one. So, because this flux density represents the amount of the nucleus. Right, so, this power plant is right. So we can make the proportional constant between this. It's called TAIWAN next to it. In other words, the power flux density that exists in your power plant. It has a proportional constant, which is F0, next to TAIWAN. Okay, so we can use Gauss' law to Xiaoda. This is a low area of 100%. Is it a waiting hill, right? If we are considering a dot river. This is the Dai river like Chiaozi. Then at the same time. We're going to do this cool man's law. We have done experiments with Xiaoda's power plant. It will be inversely proportional to the square of distance. Comparison with electric and nuclear materials. Its intermediate proportional constant is K. Then this push paper we mentioned earlier. Marspa used to be first director of the baking temperature DC laboratory. Its main job. It is necessary to clean up the research line of this baking temperature DC. A major contribution to that baking temperature DC. It uses this principle of cow sway. How many of this K were measured? So we use this law of master GAO. Then cooperate with this seizure law. You can find this proportional constant. What is the value of F0 only? Good. Then let's imagine the simplest situation. It's this CFSS. Assume it is a spherical surface. This sphere of the far ball. Then the spherical surface. This position is measured. If the foot pedal is R, we'll know it's a sesta to sesta. A sesta sesta. At this time we are in this space. We have the entire sphere. This basic point can be written as square sesta low star low reverse. Sesta here low stadium low. A special name is called only divided three-dimensional angle. However, this is sometimes used without using it. Just ignore it. So when our power plant is this RP method QRP side of this thing, that's because this striking rate is in its direction. I'm sorry I've exposed a direction that represents the unit phasor. It's the distance from this original heart to the place where your test point is. That direction should be half a pound. Okay, so it is the normal vector on the sphere we imagine. So its internal unit result is equal to 1. So I can get the power plant of this Coulomb. KQ of square parts. Then the area of this sphere on the layer is the integral of the R square where the sesta drip is sent. Then this item can be eliminated. Then K and epsilon are both hidden arts. We can take it outside. Then go outside after this chicken part here. It's 4 shots. Chicken parts on the entire spherical surface. It's 4 shots. So I got 4 shots epsilon only. Then on the layer. The technique of hiding the wheel law. The electric point on the layer. After this electric coupling is eliminated. We found out the hidden technique in the law of buckle wheel. This KS finger. It's equivalent to 1 in 4 schools S0-0. After we put 2 stickers in, you can get S0-0. That's similar to the same concept. We can define the flux density of stone. Relationship with stone yard. Use a similar approach. We can assume stone flux density between the stone field. Also in a proportion. So when it's in proportion, this proportional constant, we call it a stream of light and tranquility. This is a silly flow. Under the unit of the MPS we use. This is a silly flow. It's like a mature for children. Of course this battery theory. Horse-water equation. In fact, it will follow the physical unit you are using. Difference. Then we'll explain it later. This is the basic physics you use. Different units on both sides. Then they have some different changes. Okay, then come here. We've already put this meso. The source of his 4 equations. We've roughly explained. Then in these 4 equations. Originally streamlined concept from the court. What was pushed out? It's the concept of flux. There is also this concept of seculation. The idea of that Kern's sec. Then we use these 2 concepts. Build these 4. Ma Suifang City gives this flux density. There is also this power plant and stone plant. Finally, let's make up another assumption. Flux density and this. Between power plants. In free space is a political relationship. And stone flux density and stone factory. In Fawley's North, it is also a proof relationship. We got this for equations about the power plant and market. Then what about other things afterwards? This is Leah Leli's story. We can further explore how to use these equations of water. Solve this problem of many different battery learning. We have introduced all the equations of horses and it. So the next point is how to use these waterproof programs to solve various battery problems. Okay, then our first chapter is to introduce some basic concepts. There are many basic concepts I have introduced just now. So there is only some proper supplements in some places. It's this 1.0 and 1.1. We have introduced most of these two sections before. I'll do some supplements here. Then we start from section 1.2. Speaking of this meso equation. When applying it to all kinds of problems. Then we have some basic answers. First of all, you need to be able to understand. At the beginning, what we want to introduce is the factory throughput. There is also a concept of phasor analysis. What about the concept here we have probably said before? We'll jump over. What about here? There is a concept called kicking the belly. Domestic point, this is a kicking stomach. We have learned 12 things before. Represents the distribution from a flow field. Or in the power plant market distribution. The electric shell that ran out. Or the amount of some imagined fluid. Then there is a lesson. This is Xuanju. Then it's mainly used to decide. Your flow field is somewhere. Is it a center for this announcement? So this is related to the announcement. This is related to black holes and white holes. Then let's talk about this hole now. It's related to the stock field. How do you say that a little? Because although the equation listed by Max, it's all in the bright field, right? Look at the secret of the light 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 of the light. The secret of current. Next is the electric field intensity. Then the stone field strength. These are all Xiong-Liang. The stock we see is the power box. But in this Max equation, basically, if we consider welfare space, he has 3 components for the power plant. Real production strength 3 components. A total of 6 components need to be used. These 20 independent equations of partial Chinese people to solve. Or use 6 vector equations to solve. But we will find out later. What about this Maser equation? It can make us under some special circumstances. Imagine that there is a pure and bright field. This pure bright field exists as commonly known as this potential. Pugiction. Then the potential has a pure bright potential. There is a light down potential. Then after introducing this potential, these 6 pure this one. The horse water hair can be transformed into only 4 parts. It takes more than a few people. Look at this later. So we accept as discussed earlier. These concepts of image field, divergence and rotation, Damergeist and Curry. For this stock, from the quantitative field, it also has a fractional only operation, called grading. This T-degree concept now is not only our battery. Melody uses almost all kinds. Are there research on AI or the so-called optimization presidents? All use this body-belly concept. The concept of waiting in China. Then what is the concept of this body-belly? Let's think about it. It's just, if this is the cold number of S and T, then I'm not writing it right here. It should be X here. It's violation of space X. We can say that the T degree of maintenance One-dimensional domestic point. If ours is not this stock field, if it's xy's cold speed, we can draw a SY situation diagram. Here forms a zone. Common product area. This area looks a bit like a mountain. Right? Like a mountain. Okay, that's a picture of a section. We can put it in this service situation. Draw it on XY. We can get a contour diagram. For example, like this. This is its peak. It's its peak right here. Then the other. We can draw it in every circle. The contour line looks like this. Then now it's assumed. We're on this mountain. It's going down the mountain. When you walk down every place, it might say I'm here now. I'm going to go down at this point. In other words, it must be from position of higher contour lines. Go to a lower contour. Then it can go in this direction. Can go this direction. Can go this direction. Can go this direction. Go in this direction. It will be all right. But in this direction. When you walk in this direction. When it comes to this direction, we call it folding tower. If you walk in a strict direction, then he is actually at this distance of a unit length. What distance does he go? In fact, it means you are going to a domestic site this time. No? That is, we can write it as first, not first. It's him going south. Just find out his violation of the length of that direction. Then you can understand it immediately. He goes down the direction where the maximum distance can be reduced. It's the direction perpendicular to this contour line. Contour vertical direction. He descended the fastest as he walked. So this is in many so-called optimization problems. Or AI uses the surface to find oftmars to make the weak appear inside the problem. Then they will choose to say. For example, when we are looking for the best value. When using numerical methods to find solutions. From this point of view. Then we need to find the lowest point or the highest point. If the lowest point is found. If we go this all the way. If the direction of the kick. Then it should be the deployment that can be spent the least. Then you can go. The lowest value you want. Or the highest place to climb up. How? Okay, so why? This is in many numerical methods. There is a method called DPC descent. The fastest numerical method. This is the fastest way to drop. Its key point is actually. It's at every step. All go to the direction of its kicking degree. Just control how much you go. Maybe it's going faster at the beginning. Not to be relaxed. Then, each step is a little shorter. But still follow the kicking direction. Then, in this way, you can control it to find the lowest point. So this is how to screen a lot of so-called optimization. We'll buy these questions. Common methods. Good. Then this is what is called T-degree. Domestic point. Domestic point calculations. Look at it's written like this. In fact, it can be transported in small quantities. Because we have mentioned it again and again. Such an operator. It's about X chapter. Add the Y film and then add the Z film. So we see. Dimerged D is this thing. Is it right to have an internal disease with D? So we'll get this. Part Yao dx. Part Yao x. Add part Yao dy. Part Yao y. Add part Yao dz. Part Yao z. Then when carry. I'll just treat it as two of these X-ray. Cross Y does it like the bright way. Right. So it's equivalent to this XYZ. Here is the del operator. That's 8989X. 8989Y 8989Z. This is EXYZ. Such a calculation. Just like 2. The calculation method is exactly the same when cross is. So now the rule. It does it for a stock. When it counts. Of course it's obvious. You can tell that it is. Pray and 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 pray. Pray and 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 pray. Add Z. Pray and 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 P. Okay. This is if our repair can be regarded as when XY is plastic. We use contour lines similar. There is also the concept of CPDC. We can understand its physical function. But if we are considering this factory in a three-dimensional space. No. When this TCHYZT. At this time. Assuming a fixed T. This TCHYZT is equivalent to a certain paper. That paper. Assume it is called PC0. Here. This is a Cephas. There is a name behind this Cephas. Called a plane of. It's because. It is that all the fingers of Pussy on this side are Pusidae. All SYZs can make the above cold speed. Pussy SYZT is equal to Pussy, Pussy is equal to Pussy, Pussy is equal to Pussy. Okay, if time becomes the time when this T plus data T. Then at this time, the finger of Pussy became the original Pussy dig. Add another change. This is called delta PC. Therefore, in this discussion, our stock is not long. It represents many planes. Many are known to be like this. Any XY in this plane. The corresponding domestic electric leg system. What is it? It is the Dharma phase of this plane. It is equivalent to the Dharma phase of this plane. So this is. What's next? Let's introduce a few. This quantity is often used very well. There are basically two. This is often used. The amount of items is very weighting. It's this ADOS-BC. Equal to BDOS-CCDOS-ACDOS-AC-DOS-B. Then I'm waiting for something like this. Why can it be established? So we actually follow his wishes. You can come up with his results. Let's take C to across B as an example. Across B is defined as a parallelist line determined by A and B. His area. His direction is the unit vector of the normal vector obtained by doing the right-hand rule in direction A to B. Therefore, this fact means that across B. Then he has a unit vector in this vertical direction. Make an internal machine with C. Then C makes it an internal machine with it. It becomes the high value of this parallel 6-hedron. Then we know the volume formula of this parallel 6-hedron. It's just that the bottom machine is high. So what about that? Such a 4 sub C to across B. It means that it is formed by ABC. Volume of parallel 6 hedrons. Okay, so why? The same can be derived. A to B cross E. BC cross A. They also represent the same. This volume of parallelogram. So these 3 4 words are equal. Of course you need to pay attention to this order of arrangement between them. Because here only across B. Here we maintain the order of ABC BC AC AB. If there is a reverse order between Ren Yang and cross, then he will be because of cross 4. If reversed, it becomes complicated. So there will be a replica number missing. So this is the first horizontal equation. If the order of ABC, then they all represent volume of the same parallel flow head. Okay, actually what we see is this A phase across. Then B cross E got the result we've known just now. He will be the comparison between this B and C. The area determined. Then the direction is a direction that is perpendicular to them. Then the direction perpendicular to them is followed by A after cross. It will be perpendicular to these two quantities and after the degree is vertical. It must return to this B and C. Go to the determined plane. No longer perpendicular to it. So it will fall on the planes of B and C. So when it comes to planes B and C, we can use several BS to add several CS. Then get the phasor of the medicine. Good. So how much component does this phasor have? How many ingredients are C? Then it's very simple at this time. It becomes the accumulation of A and C to determine the size of B. Then the accumulation of A and B determines C. This stock in the that's in this place. The only thing to discuss is, why is C from A certified? Then A arrives B, why is it? Okay, what about this part? In the early stage, there is one of our seniors, scholars in the United States. It's called Fang Dazheng. Then he uses Zhu Wen. Learn 2 textbooks on electromagnetics. Then this book was quite advanced at that time. Then I'll read his book. When he introduced these 2 facts, he introduced a verbal silly. It's called far fight attack. That's such a far focus offensive concept. In fact, in the current discussion of the great power, it is also a common strategy. This was mainly during the Warring States period. Please reuse this guest. That violation of residence. Then let's take this situation. Tell us about our attitude towards the 6 countries. It should be a long-term focus on the offense. Then, the country is far from Britain by the sea. We will make good friends with the country and maintain this on both sides. 2 good diplomatic relations. That's closer to us. Uighur and Zhaoguo and South Korea. Then we'll go and beat them. Put their strength in their land. Then you're attacking these. Zhao State, Wei State, South Korea. That they might ask for help from their country. But because his country is in good condition, he won't help them. Then we can do it step by step. Swallow the 6 countries' diseases. So this is called the concept of far focus attack. So here, the result corresponding to the force is A to C. C corresponds to B from A to B. A and C are farther away. So we give it a certificate number. Then A has arrived at B is closer. So we'll attach a number to it. So this is the far focus attack. Okay. Good. Then these 2 are equivalent to being introduced after. Let's introduce an operation. This is a common device. Rule. That's the weak circle. In the basic crisis. Our 2 little tricks. When it is complementary, their siege will be equal to the first technique. The second technique. Add the second technique. Become the first technique. So what? When ours. D.L. Proctor. And what he deserves. T-degree divergence rotation. In fact, it's all dimensional operations. And it is a real-life dimensional division operation. So these 2 fields, carry this together. You should respect this dimension. This circle is weak. So we can see. It's said that it's 2 stock fields. Take the T-degree together. Then he is equivalent to. The first one is silent. Then the second pure bright field is taken into the OR point. At 1 step. Then do not absorb the mineral site. Okay, the same is true when it comes to Taiwan regulated mines. When the Taiwan regulated mine, you just drop this beta. Think of it as a phase. So at this time, there's this one that doesn't suck. Come to Taiwan regulated mine sites. There is also H to this regulating mine site. This doesn't suck. So you see, this is a Taiwan regulated mine site. But when it works on pure light, just become a little domestic. Then here's the props. Just maintain this calculation of the file here. Okay, that Taiwan documents are like this. Then the same is true when Kerr. There is a similar relationship. Just you need to pay attention. At this time, when Kerr. Be careful before and after. So in this place, note that it is a domestic point. PC to Kerr this A. So this order cannot be changed. This is not an A. Must not be ahead of A. So it's better not to be wrong. The last one is also a trend paper we often use. We often use it later. Especially when you are in a day of congratulations. We want to discuss public green and this power for ostensity. Such horizontal and horizontal momentum will be used when you wait and see. That is to say, if there are two crosses, take divergent to him. Then let's use the divergent paper above just now. Then it will become a KIA that is B. There is also KIB that A arrived. You see, if the order was just mentioned. Is this del AB right? So if we reverse it, it will be B to KRA. Then the order of this del and it is the same as that of this one. So maintain equality. The other one is obviously to act on B. When it works on B, its order becomes a DLB. Because this DL cannot be placed behind B to cross. So it must be placed in front of B and cross it. So its order becomes a DL. Then B. Its order does not follow this DLAB order. So at this time, you need to add a vegetarian number to this. This is also a concept called a fence. Let's talk about two more. Very important phaser is very suitable. One of them is this domestic elevator do. Cross he must be equal to. Then why is this? Because I just explained. This domestic electricity is not his hard physical meaning. It's this plane. The plane of the crabs. His method. It's the location of this T-do. Domestic electricity. So what about that? What about this relationship? Therefore, the items generated by him must be perpendicular to this plane. Then it is impossible to say this vertical first-class plane and go around it. Then form this announcement point on it. This is impossible to happen. So as long as this method is the field that goes out here, he wouldn't have something like this class. So its spots for the flaunt pot will not exist. So it's equal to inside. Okay, this is the first one. What about the second one? This is when you have this phenomenon of showing off the pot. This place outside this pot spot. The big Mergeist is of course equal to. Because of your flow. Or hold a line. Movie line, etc. All of this loop area line. This section of phone coin. What about the wind coins? No start. It's not over, either. So it is impossible to have divergence on this announcement line. Then here's the place to announce it. He just let the nearby line wrap around like this. He didn't show any new examples of this fluid. Or our imaginary head quantity. There are no examples of seam holding volume. So its divergence must be equal to. So these two are very, very important. One is very equivalent to the so-called two equations of quantity that we can later use. What is the equation of these four images? It also depends on the concept proposed here. Okay, then we will introduce a special operation. Call it this Lanfola. That's the French mathematician Nafra's. When he is studying many problems. All found this calculation. Then the Lanfola he found. Actually, it originally came out. In fact, these results of these two dimensions. Then I can write it out now. Come and take a look at this Lafroylian. Facey, its definition is 4. Gradient Facey takes this Rigas. This gradient is included in the information label. It is equal to this x direction. It's Facey. HXY, HXC, HXYZ, HXC, 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 HXC. HXC, 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 HX. So this is a very important operation. What about this calculation? Actually, it is related to fluctuations in various oils. There is also this arrow. That way to spread, etc. is. Even the motion of this electronic. The shoe ran basic science. Then this will appear inside. Even if you choose this calculation. That's behind us. We just choose this thing. To represent this series of calculation processes. Okay, the next one is Xiong-Liang Chang. What about Xiong-Liang's long laxan? We can take a look. Xiong-Liang's long pulling fumigation. If the casting example refers to the angle as the mark, that can be written as AX component of the ration. Can be written like this. But if written like this, it's a good thing for us. Because we can turn it into 3 components. Then every part is the way to choose the stock. But the problem is that there are some problems. We are used to using some other marking systems. For example, the original standard system. Or the original ball marking system. In the original ball marking system and the original marking system. They're basics. Unit phasor itself is not a fixed direction. So we can't write a similar forsec like this. So under that situation, its nafaxon should be written as domestic nafaxon. Cut Kirkira. So from another perspective, that is, Kirkira can be written as domestic point-to-point search means a reduction. Nafax A. So when we sometimes show up, when the data is used in the table of Kirkira, I can use this company. Draw it as this attack and this easy to combine. That's in the data sheet. It would be quite easy to change to this. It's just in this more complex and important system. Then such a simplification cannot be achieved. We have to rely on this. Okay. Good. So what? Next, we are looking at some specific important systems. So because of our TV discussion, this problem to be solved. Often they follow this. Even if it's a piece of roll. Even if the equation room is related to the. So why? What we hope is to say, in the feed system we are considering, it can be broken down into changes in direction X, changes in Y direction, changes in your direction. Then solve it separately. This is the best. That's what. This can do this. Only right-angle feeding systems can be used. Okay, so it's done in the system. We have some calculations for it. Then live a little more. Divergence. Then the gunship. Its calculation. We'll organize it in this place. This is easier and more convenient. Where to make it? Then all my mother. Launched. The earliest equation. Basically, it is also used. Such a collaborative visit. Then what happened later? Everyone will study it. Discover. In practical problems, this original waste system is often used. There is also this original ball waste system. these two types of waste systems. I won't explain it carefully here. I suggest you can refer to it. This battery wave I wrote. This path inside. For this aboriginal waste system. There is also this original ball waste system. Their concept. And their dimension calculation. Etc. All of them explain the calculation process. There are also explanations for how to get this result. It is recommended that you refer to it. Because if you talk about it one by one, this is too much content. Good. There is a point here. That is, we found this important finger angle system. Aboriginal important system. Seek important systems. They all have a common feature. That is, they are targeting them. Come on. When the equation is listed in the temple. Like this hair-wearing style. After listing, they have a characteristic. That is to say, they are three bases that compete with each other. That cup of locks. So for example, if the original work needs a system, that's the direction of the original radius. Then the direction of this angle. And your own direction. Three directions. It is the three directions of soft hair and Z. These three certificates. And after these three certificates, we'll ask them. Even if the choice is not righteous, we find that he can be broken down into soft and connotation. The inclusion of Cheng Ifa. The meaning of Cheng Yi. This is called separation of verbal. So if you've been in engineering mathematics, if you have learned it, we'll know this separation of verbal. What's the situation? That's very important. A method to fill in the equation of dimension. Okay, then this original custom is like this. Then the same is true for asking for a mark. We can also get this radius. Then the zenith angle direction. There is also this horizontal angle direction. What about three directions? You can choose the equation in this canon. Can exist together. Then break it down into three long-dimensional equations to solve. So it's very important. So we have a question. Is it possible that there are other areas to make the system? There are similar ones. In general equations. Guess what this nature is? Okay, what about this question? Probably in the 1923. Some mathematicians have conducted careful research on this problem. What he had to consider at that time. This Academy Earth Science. Also, this is when Easton deduces this general theory of relativity. He wants to consider the green changes in this area between the universe. Because of the existence of mass, the universe in space and time is in the universe. There are changes in green in this area. So he needs it. Is there any way? In an important system. Then the cold tree that they can be decomposed. From partial mode equation to a cube that is a member of the standing committee to find solutions. Science from 8 basic training. If it was ording, you can choose its food to solve the problem by sorting it out. So it found. Actually, there are only about 8 or about 10 types. The watch system has this nature. Then these properties are just what I said. A right angle important system, 8 important system. There is also this important system. What else? For example, an important system for requesting. Important systems for hyperbolic surfaces. Important systems for throwing and missed faces, etc. Then these second line are similar. In the important system is. It is possible to build this important system of government divisions. And they are in this calculation and it may be disassembled into 3 directions. This standing committee equation of 3 variables is solved. Nothing else works. So this was very important in the past. Because in the past, there were no computer numerical methods to solve these. equations of articles. So they had to find a way to solve the scientific and medical solutions in three-dimensional ways. These essay equations. The study city of these subjects. Not necessarily every one is suitable. It is an important system for fingering. So many people study it. What to do after the system is in existence. What to do if you don't want to do the system. Then what to do when you get out of the original state. What to do when you have a hyperbolic curve. What to do when you throw a mistake. So there were many mathematicians in the past. It took a lot of time. After solving these differences, you need to do the system. This is the problem of developing science. Or the problem of choosing a bad choice. That's all the choices of these light rain. They pushed it down. Much more vulnerable. We usually call it this physical one. Space show. Then these spaces hose are the choices. Including what we will encounter later. Space show. Space show Bachesho side choice. Then Legion de Prinmin. And so on. They will all run out. Then these are original standard and request standard. We're still using it often. As for the others, like the source machine or we're also special Korean. AI party selection or this SAP lilac faces the corresponding formula and so on. What about these Korean numbers? Now it's probably only in math strategies. They can be seen. But in general, no one is learning those things anymore. Because what if that thing appears now? We'll use it. This numerical method. That numerical method includes saying, like this one, the face of the enemy god platform. Translated Mesa, we wait. The president's many numerical methods can help us solve it. This problem with these battery waves is quite complicated. So we're no longer discussing it carefully. Those special important systems. We usually refer to Baoyu now. This important system. Important system with original ball. Then this is an explanation of some basic concepts. Good. Next is the part where mask has equations. We have explained this part before. So we won't mention it here. Those two people who are worth watching. It's very important to come with Faraday and this mask. That is to say, all the four equations established by mask. Because at that time, his definition of this nuclear and his 2 degrees. There is no certain standard yet. So this was later extended in various different Ma Shuifang people under Du Liang's system. For example, this is physically used. This knife can be an example. Electronics and more. It decodes the electromagnetic movement. Then what they use. This Ma Shuifang city. Call it the CGS system. Because they use the merit points. Then. And that temple. That system. So in their system. Can't see anything F1 people's service. But there are a lot of 4 factions. So that's a little more troublesome. Called CGS. That's in high energy physical math and small mass. A very useful way to make the party mouth. But in our motor system. Inside the radio wave group. Most of our research is general battery waves. What about the battery wave that is commonly used? The system I've used. Because my daily volume and system are MKS characters. That's the company. Then what? Is K-Rombot public scripture correct? Then seconds. Then the key point is Kowloon. Kowloon is the Yangdu of the electric nuclear. What about Yangdu, the electric nuclear? Let's take the so-called American bloggers to compare. They have some. This method of measuring pads and quantity. That unit is called Kowloon. Even the scientist of this Kowloon law. So in this so-called under the MTSQ word. Then we can examine some units of this physical quantity. This physical unit of quantity is very important, because in many of our calculations, in fact, this was discovered first in fluid mechanics. In the final study, it was found that if an equation is true, his equation is the unit presented on the left. It must be consistent with the unit of the equation on the right. So this is called one of the ones you choose. It's definitely a concept. Then in the battery science, then I encountered a lot of situations. Under the various situations, this unit sometimes, there are some different changes to note. I'll give some examples to illustrate. For example, the fundamentals of power plants. The fundamental thing about battery is electric rivers and electricity. You go again, right? If we see a river of electricity, all of them are charges words. Then it has a very cool wheel power. Positive problem is right. Okay, but what if our electric river? It is distributed in an object. If it's inside a nest. Then what I want to talk about at this time is that this body should be the secret of the nucleus inside. So this represents its unit. The secret of Ruyi's electronuclearity is beautiful square meters. How many cool wheels of electric cores are there? Then sometimes we find it later. In some of our specific extreme situations. What we might want to consider is electric river distributed on a surface. If it is an electric river distributed on the surface, its unit becomes, how cool is it in the middle of each square meter? Become like this. So it's not like this soft. This is how it turns out to be soft. Therefore, if the electric river above a line of foot is, then we become each unit length. How cool is there per meter? Okay, then this decent line. In fact, there are some. Is this assumption learned in these boxes right? Because what do you mean by a few boxes of learning? No size of electricity, no wide expansion of wire. Then I don't have a look at it, right? It's when you discuss it. Don't worry about his sickness. Don't worry about his back. You assume it's a side. Then a line is a line. Don't worry about how thick and thin the thread is. This is like this. So there are a lot more. Among the issues we discussed, we'll assume that the kernel in the problem is, it depends on volume, or a face, or line. Then all this one is, we may be able to meet. Good. So, it's extended to this. This is the current. The secret of current. Or nuclear flux secret. That's the current. The definition of the secret of current is the same. Because its definition is, if I have a side, if you block it, I can know this. How many electric boxes will pass per unit time? Therefore, the unit of this current is ampere. What is the definition of ampere? The definition of ampere is, this vaccine passes the electric box. This is called ampere, right? Okay, so, when on Voland's Caroline TV, it requires a face to calculate how much current it passes. So, this Voland Caroline TV. This unit is how much current flows per square meter. So pay attention to this. If it is surface current, this can also be. Especially in electronics, there are many. Its surface current density must be considered. When this surface current secret, you need to know that there is an electric current flowing through. Where is it? Just say it's on this side. You make a line. Then look at this line. How much current will pass per unit time? So its unit is ampere by Rice. Ampere by Rice. If so, this line Caron's words. That becomes, this current flows directly on this line. So at this time, its line constancy. Anti is everywhere. Just arrange it. What we will see next is this electric box hand-read rule. We've said it before. Then we said the field line. We've also talked about Slack's density. That's in my lecture notes. This thing written with this toward the system represents the factory that changes with time. Wait for this front desk to write it with this stage. Represents the non-province with frequency change. Wet ton. Then let's talk about the waiting side. The first thing we talk about here is the Maxwell equation. The main four equations. The two equations. The stock equation is frastity. The equation of flux density. There is this electric flux secret in here. That is to say, the secret of electric flux. This air batch area is divided into. It is equal to the total amount of electric boxes it covers. Then the secret of stone flux. Points in the entire wind meter. The total stone flux it obtains. It's U, right? This is his two laws. This stock of horse water has an equation. Then what's next? That Court's induction law. And Ampere's law. They're corresponding. It is the power plant strength. And this magnetic field strength. Right. Power plant strength. With this magnetic field strength. How did it be brewed? Good. Then this means. At any point. Let's put a test core. The force it is subject to. After processing the test core, we get its power plant strength. What is the strength of this power plant? Because of this force. If it is done, it becomes a power plant in fute. After using weak light, it is futile. So the unit of this power plant, after forming units of this length, it's equivalent to. This function is made in the unit's electric box. This is called Ford's definition of Ford, right? Therefore, this electric field is common. The unit is volt per meter. So what we can see is, this electric field is specified by the electric box and the electric power. The ground down. Then the word flux secret is the current. For this small coil, the force generated by the small current. This magnetic force. IL cross B. If you hold the LS current, it is the magnetic field L. There is a wire line here. The power of the flux to him. This wire is used to determine the force he receives. To the size and direction. So from here, I can decide. This magnetic flux secret. There is also a computer wall belly. Then we mentioned earlier. It's this Faraday law. And this one. Must let after the displacement current added. This dispresso current thing is here. It is the Ampere law of promotion. What about the original Ampere law? Only H size is equal to the current enclosed by this C. Then add this one now. What is the density of the electric flux that passes inside? This is decided. So in the end, we can get this. The horse usage equation for integral situation is here. Then the only situation of horses using the equation here. That textbook from a very early age. This must be explained by the horse for a long time using the equation. Of course, they may not necessarily be like me using the concept of Ferrati. Then I came over to speculate on this concept. They don't necessarily do this. That's a common way. For example, there are some famous textbooks from the University of Battery Studies. He directly followed the equation. These 4 dimensions. Or in the form of points. It should be in the form of points. As a whole battery. But the business doesn't choose. A basic assumption. Just accept these equations. After you accept it, criticize later. Make a lot of. But this problem is that many students and scholars, at the beginning you want him to accept these things. Because you don't know if his oil comes, right? Then his physical explanation. I will tell you that this is the flux, what is this customer, etc. But you may not know why the flow of guests can access this place. So that's why I started this. I'm going to find historical documents. Find out the year. How did Mom come up with this method? So when you know the root of it, then these equations are for you. It's a more familiar. This equation that I think is meaningful. Okay, I'm not criticizing. This is not good as a basic assumption. But because, in fact, the result of Mars Sol was also written by the inner writer. You can only treat it as a hypothesis, right? Just talking about the process of writing. That's actually quite important. Because we're doing a lot. When learning in the field. Often, field A needs to go to field B. Field B needs to go to field C. Do this often. So it's actually impossible to fly back. Okay, anyway, so he basically assumes that, right? It's just that his meaning can be more clear. Then, let's talk about a lot of this book. At the beginning, there were a lot of people in the film removing mode square God room. So, it is mainly based on this refresh your phone. So many students may think that this, after this. If he uses divergent or searches, you can come up with this integral equation. So it will think it's yes. The fundamental part of this horseshoe equation is this form of. Actually, it's not right or wrong. The fundamental of the horse-water equation. It's actually this point form. Okay, I've seen it just now. What about this point form? We make this integral volume. Or the area of this point. Only after the arrival of the spirit is the result of this form of siege. Okay, there is another one. That is to say, when we are behind. When discussing this boundary condition. When the boundary conditions. So many books. When discussing boundary conditions. He has no way of doing it at all. I have to go back to this point type. Let's discuss his boundary conditions. Okay, so this is basically the method immediately. In fact, the Buddha in Yili Kingdom is more involved than the dimension type. Actually, it's more spatial. He pushed it from this side. So this is the same. This is a different idea when learning battery skepticism. Then if we look at the Mother Shui Huang Neng Sai above, then we will find. Then what? Wait. You see, this is the closest points for power plant strength. It is the rich man who changes the magnetic flux. Then what? This line integral of this magnetic factory. Its current. There is also the power flux secret to establish a telephone at any time. We can see that these two methods are almost the same. It's just that one has a rich account, the other has no rich account. That one has the electric current from the outside. One is not. Right. If you consider it again. When this power flux is, our high-level power will reach this power. Then what? This basic word for this B will become a force. Because we can't find it. Is this a scramble? Okay, this early. Just graduated from NTU and got a degree and went to the United States to come back. Then someone came over and said, we have found this one in the United States. Then he can do many uses. So is this battery student mentioned in the study? Because they want to be an agent. That company that claims to have found a company that is scrambling to eat. But I told him that there should be no such thing. Because if you really find a single level, probably, at least it's impossible to talk about it. That's definitely okay. But I haven't heard of this. And it's a single level. It's unlikely that this exists. So how much time did Ferrati do that year? No single level was found. How could a single level eater appear here? Right? Tell him. But then he dispersed. I don't know if I have been to the agent after leaving. But later, I didn't hear of such products appearing in Taiwan. But at this time we apply physicists. I think it's a theory. He thinks that if there is electricity in this light, there is no river of electricity, no river of light. It seems that the equation actually looks asymmetry. Just say it because of mathematics. We know that many mathematicians pursue beauty. What does beauty include this symmetry? Right. So he thinks. At this time, the telephone and the word face are completely symmetrical. After all, I feel a little sweaty when I am in the beauty. So is it possible for us? Although this cannot be found. But I'll give him one. This telegram and words are above. Is that okay? Good. Then, if the words and words remain, then his equation. It became like this. Become like this. Then what if it becomes like this? I can see. This electric type is in addition to this. In addition to changes in stone flux. There will also be an impact on this magnetic current. The influence of magnetic current. If it is the magnetic field strength, the atmosphere of the loop, then everyone will maintain this power flux density. There is also the influence of this current. Then this Gaussian law. The integral of this power flux. It's equivalent to electric combination. The integral of the flux of the magnetic field. It's this magnet. Right. Okay, everything looks right here. Then we also have this Kawato-Hara Haster. Chi-Shishu-Hang's concentration is very corresponding. Very beautiful. Its dimension form can also be written. All right. Very good. Okay, but on the issue. Do this if you are innocent. Shubuksu wants to bring in Kai Liu and Chiha. Then at this time, our physicist. Or is this applied mathematician? We found out that we were in the following courses. There will be some theorems of electromagnetic theory. Discover certain currents. If you wait for a magnetic current, or wait for the school to surround some magnetic rivers, its mathematical form is relatively simple. But the result of the equation is the same. So when this situation is, I'll find that this Kai Liu is quite useful. Especially later, we will talk about some basic and advanced theorems. For example, the so-called equivalence police hand equivalent principle. In the principle of equivalent, we must introduce the concept of Kai flow and Kai he. This will allow his equivalent principle to obtain complete results. But the principle of equivalent is a mathematically equivalent thing after all. It just makes your equations maintain the same. But it is just explained by another physical approach of flow delay and method. So it did not really find late flow or late flow. It's just in this mathematical process. Introducing this word and word flow is a calculation of our equation. And the physical understanding of this equation will be easier and simpler. Okay, we'll see this later. So although there is no real word list and word flow in nature, but in our discussion of telephony theory, add this magnetic current and late combination in many places. Let our discussion simplify and purify. And let everyone's mathematical model compare this beautiful, simple and authentic appearance. Okay, so this is what we may use later on. Or this place of magnetic current. What we want to discuss next is It means that QD unit is both a good match and 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 a good match. I'll pass a lot of metal. There will be a lot of strange things passing by. It may also pass by sea water or diffraction through mountains, etc. Very, very many. So this battery wave is not just about what surface exists in the north of Fowley's. We must consider this battery wave passes through some. When we hear people pass by some material things, what impact will it have? So what we want to discuss next is in the space where these matter exists. How is the battery field reacting? So we're going to discuss these things. The simplest case, of course, it is the free space mentioned earlier. Free space is to assume that we are in the space. Nothing. It's just empty. This is called free space. In addition, air generally. The impact on this battery wave. Very small too. So at some point, it can be regarded as free space. Of course there are exceptions. For example, if our capacitors are inside, it's too short. So its power plant strength higher than the so-called air breakdown voltage. That is, that won't be considered an air pair. The molecules inside the air will be transformed into pairs. It becomes the state of this electric pair layer. In that case, we call past. At that time, there was no way to treat it as free space. That time I went above our Earth. There is an electric pair layer. On the other side of the electric pair layer, its air is subject to the universe's design. A suspicious reunion with the sun. So there are many etiquettes. So in that part of the city of telephone, that part of the air itself is electrically conductive. It uses a very high conductivity. So in that place, of course not. Treat it as this well as north. About this city. There are also research on plasma and so on. It is very, very important research in the early stage. Let me give you a look at the radio wave group of our national Taiwan University motor system. Probably in the early days. It was China Central Radio Station at that time. There is a very famous scholar. It's called the wind arrow. The wind arrow is called when the wind arrow was in mainland China. In Chongqing. Just help me tell. Build the infinite radio station and other things. So when I always talk about him. In the future, a special plane will bring this wind arrow to Taiwan. Then Feng Jian established a NTU. This shop slope research room. What was the research in this Jinpa research room at that time? Just research the store. What to do in the first floor of the store? Because there was no artificial satellite at that time. Then your store slope. For example, we plan to Taiwan. Like the mainland's rear broadcast of a new war. At that time, you knew the Kuomintang and the Communist Party and the household resistance. Just on both sides. I remember when I was successfully training. Work hard to fight the other side. Say when the battle is about to happen. The military service gate. When have you been surrounded inside, etc. So I was talking about these things at that time. Then there are so many empty spaces. What's that thing about Minya? Go and give them. Because of things like this, living in the deep water of compatriots in mainland China. Okay, so we want to transmit the radio waves from the radio station too. This is the back of mainland China. At that time, there was no other way to use short term. That's the call to this television city. Then it is reflected by the city of Jianli and reflects to the rear of the mainland. Then they can listen to it if they have a radio. Our central horror radio broadcast. Of course my husband will do this too. So you'll hear. When the basic order of military service. That other person will be very. Okay, welcome. What good is a certain card? So they already know. So the city. That's right. The Earth is actually a very important part. Because he blocked it. Many cosmic lines. Something like that. Then let's see now. If it's inside anytime, then we can assume. This flux secret. Be a policy with power plant strength. The brightness of stones and market strength guarantee the bottom. Then in this free space. There is no current flow. So it is equal to. Good. Therefore, according to this MKSC system. I'll get. The next day is 4 shots. The secondary period of participation. Handrai Permitan. Okay, why is this defined? Handrai is from the United States. Very famous. Study advocate expert. So the inductor is based on this hierarchy. Right, when we do other people's circuits. How small is hierarchy the unit of inductor? Then this milling often appears in the inductor formula. And when it appears, as long as it is the previous length, it is equivalent to this inductor. So this milling is the couple during the 4-photo Senate. As for how Henry uses MKSC to deteriorate. When you go home, you can practice. Okay, then come on the app. It is 8.854 to 10 pairs of 12. Okay, sometimes for the convenience of calculation. We'll shoot it for nearly 436%. One Piece Part 10. It has been a Farah Basin army once. Same. It's when the capacitor appears. Often, it needs to be an F0. Become a ring field. Divide a distance from one area. That's whether its capacitor is correct. Therefore, F0 is an important indicator related to capacitors. So it just becomes meter. It's Farah. It's the unit of capacitor. Therefore, after we make this without this and F0, its value is 1/0 from F0. It's very, very close. Materfa Seiko on the bus with 3 floors of 10. Another commonly used unit. It's what's called in fresh base. In chronic evidence. This thing is being discussed by us. When the power plant is proportional to the market. Have very important ideals. Generally speaking. If you use these units to calculate power plant strength, it's probably more powerful than the magnetic field that exists at the same time as him. Strong and super ITA clouds and many bays. So many times in public. If we follow H. Chen and Ita Yun, the obtained calculations will be easier to calculate. Because the power plant and magnetic field are. Their values are not too much. So in general, unit of this magnetic field. When forming a unit in the power plant, there is probably this difference. Then the difference is almost the same. Yun. It's the power plant. In a magnetic factory. If the power plant is so magnetic plant, it's probably words per meter. In ampere per meter. Then the meter is just right. So this trip is 0. Usually it is. This power plant strength related to a proportional constant between magnetic strength. So this is also a very important thing. Okay, let's look at it again. After understanding these things, what we will look at is the general substances. What is the relationship between the computer and the field holding intensity in these substances? Then what is the relationship between them and the density of the electric brightness and the density of the brightness? Generally speaking, if we have an electromagnetic field from an outsider, then this will come across a material. Then the structures of the atomic molecules in this material will be affected by the actual influence of external power plants. Polarization. This polarization is not what we talk about in terms of polarization of light. No. His polarization means, in this matter, this plant and this electronics, after they were exposed to external power plants, will be separated. Let me give you an example. Generally speaking, when we talk about the city of Jianli, all of this concept, that is, we want the simplest atomic model. There is a plant in him. Then outside is the so-called electronic fish. Right. We all know now. That's based on quantum mechanics. Just outside the plant, many electrons are different. Let the ghost run on the above. Therefore, under normal circumstances, the total electricity of this electronic cloud, we can think of it as being centered here. So it's negative electricity and the political electricity, and what they produce is the effect outside. This is just a comparison between the negative electricity and the. So there is no special impact. But once we are in this place, add a computer. Add a computer. If you add a computer, because this refers to paper and this electronic cloud, all are very light quality things. So this finger paper may move a little bit here. Will move here. Move a little along this computer. So the finger paper may run to this side. On the other hand, electronic cloud, it will move in the opposite direction of the computer. So run here. So it becomes the execution of this government power box. Come here everyone. Then the execution of the negative electric box is probably here. So the power box of this Zheng is separated from the power box of the CI. After separation, this is in our state. It's called this coop. This chicken robe. The chicken robe looks like this. This is usually the case with this galvanized. It's from this negative electric box. Then when I came to this politician box, it seemed like this. I don't remember it a little. This electric dipole. Because if two of them fell together, power up and generated computers. Removal and generated computers. It's offset. But now the electrode increasing part. Once opened, the electrode is opened. After these two are opened, they created this new computer. Then this computer is in charge. Deduction in electrical science. He probably will be in the distance. 1 square part, 1 proof square or 130 square part, 1 proof. Therefore, this time is equivalent to saying, after the outside home appliance plant, the government power and nuclear power are overwhelmed. After moving, a lot of electricity will be generated. These electricity collections, accumulated effects, I'll call it pill. This is called Wall Street. then this P and the deduction of these things. That's the electronics department in my university. The book I wrote has a more detailed explanation. You can refer to it. That's all I can see now. These electric rivers in the matter will be moved due to external appliance plants. After the movement is generated, print out a new electric dipole. Computers will produce computers. Therefore, the impact of this computer, we use it as an equivalent term, called P, to express it. This P is called P. Russian reference. Therefore, for such substances, its overall power flux density, electric flux density, some of them come from this computer. So keep this app on the another part. The strength of this electric dipole I generated here. It generates additional power lines. Therefore the effect of these additional power lines added to this place where the prick is. So the secret of electric flux generated by the movement of the electric nucleus. This is the impact here. So the electric flux secret has become a batch of this thing. This is not available in free space. But once there is material, it has this thing. That's the thing. This is called good. That same truth. The same principle. This, when a substance of ours, after adding a magnetic field, after the magnetic field is added, this is not the electric combination moving. It's the electronics inside. The electrons inside. It will have this intelligent rotation. Is it right? There is this thing that is produced around the orbit. These electrons are self-selected or the ones caused by these electrons. The QA selection will print more things in a similar computer collection, called magnetic books or magnetic books. If these magnetic books are the same, it will increase the magnetic flux density and reduce its effect is this M. This is called magnetization. P is called cannon illustration. Okay. Well, we are talking about this. Some effects of the cannon. Use a P to represent it. Then how did this P come from inside? That's probably the kind of semiconductor physics. Or this study of this sutra. What, etc. Physicists. The questions they like to discuss. So for example, if you are taking semiconductor classes now, in the semiconductor class, there must be something for you to calculate. These are the pressure or this. Explore and so on. This is produced in it. Constant. Or this. Then the calculation of these things is a part of atomic physics. Or the physical part of the material. But in our battery theory, we assume these properties of these substances.